Good morning. Today is Sunday, May 23rd, 2021, the day of Pentecost. Now, this was supposed to be our final service of morning prayer, and you will still find a link to the service of morning prayer in the description to this video. But after suffering numerous technical difficulties, I have had to, for lack of a better word, punt. So today's video is going to be a little different. And perhaps that's fitting. Perhaps that's actually what it was supposed to be. Because today is our second to last service and our last morning service as Christ Episcopal Church. Many of you know that back in April, the parishioners of Christ Episcopal Church gathered in an all-parish meeting via Zoom and voted to close the parish. Our final service is next Sunday, May 30th at 4 p.m. And there's information and a link to register in the description to this video. This has been a very long journey for Christ Church, beginning over 274 years ago. And now we find ourselves in an uncomfortable place, in a place where we are closing. I have walked with all of you through this process of grief and have experienced more than my fair share of it myself. Our final vestry meeting was one filled with hope and also great sadness, as we all spoke of what Christ Church has meant to us. We'll have the opportunity to do that more on May 30th as a community, and I pray that you'll join us. And again, I invite you to open up today's service of morning prayer and pray it at home. But today I'd like to read you a piece I wrote for the Episcopal Church in Connecticut, ECCT's Clergy e-News for this month. The news had just gone out a day or two before I wrote this piece to all the clergy, to all of Connecticut, that Christ Episcopal Church was closing. And as I sat and reflected, I began to realize I was feeling something very particular in the face of all the messages I was receiving, largely from my fellow clergy, but from others as well. So today I would like my parting words to you before our service on May 30th to be these: seeing the forest through the trees. I'm so sorry the church is closing. I've heard this statement countless times over the last couple of months. After a year and a half serving Christ Episcopal Church Norwich, I'm now walking with them through their final weeks before the closing service on Sunday, May 30th. I'm so sorry the church is closing. Simple words meant to express sadness, grief, and sorrow. The phrase comes slightly nuanced depending on who is speaking it. I'm so sorry your church is closing. So sorry our church is closing. Family, friends, parishioners, and colleagues all saying the same thing, despite the nuances in phrase, expressing their sorrow and grief that the church is closing. I understand the heart behind these words, the desire to express our shared grief and sadness at the closing of this particular community in Norwich. And yet, over the past few weeks, I found myself beginning to bristle a bit at this phrase. I'm sorry the church is closing. Because, to be perfectly honest, it's not. The church isn't closing. Christ Episcopal Church Norwich is. I realize we're all bound by the confines of our language, and in our vernacular, the church has come to mean my particular faith community, my parish, my building, my home, the place where I worship, the place where my family worships and has always worshiped. My church, the church. And I understand this connection. the desire to think of and describe my particular faith community as my church or the church. Those words have fallen from my own lips countless times, more recently tinged with sorrow. The church at 78 Washington Street, Christ Episcopal Church, Norwich, my church, is closing. But as I approach the closing of my church, I find myself disturbed at my own language and my own short-sightedness. I've begun to feel perhaps I am missing the proverbial forest for the trees, for my tree. In the midst of this great forest we know as the church, we are surrounded by trees. Great oaks and quivering aspens, flowering dogwoods and red-hued maples. The variety of arboreal life is stunning if we can only stop to take it in. And it is not only the variety of trees in this holy forest that should speak to us and inspire us. It is also the great cycle of life unfolding all around us. Old trees stand alongside young saplings. Seeds rest softly on the earth, eager for the chance to grow. And trees like mine, trees that have died, fade back into the earth, replenishing the soil from which they grew to sustain a new generation. The forest, the church, is not dead. It is not closed. It is alive and well, breathing life and hope into the world, as it too is recreated and reborn, resurrected again and again. My tree, my particular corner of God's great forest, has died, and I am sad. But the forest, the great expanse of life, love, and hope, the church is alive and growing. It, I have been assured, will never die. For each tree, each sapling, each seed that makes up this great and holy forest draws strength from those who have gone before. And most of all, from the great tree rooted at the center of the forest, the tree of life, Christ, our risen, resurrected, and resurrecting Lord. Amen.